Well, Mike,
put that to bed.
Very interesting, isn't it? Very interesting.
Not only was she involved, as she said, with Lennox Lewis. They weren't involved with Lennox Lewis. They were Lennox Lewis for 15 years. They were equally Evander Holy for 15 years. Her husband, Dan, who was fantastic. He was an antagonistic, in-your-face chest puller and thumper. He went chest to chest with Don King, and he got his fighters great deals. They have been operating at the highest level. Perhaps not so much in the last 4 or 5 years, but for 20 years, the Duvas operated at the highest level. Her father-in-law, Dan's dad Lou, used to have eating competitions with Rocky Marciano back in the 50s. So boxing is properly in the Duvas' blood. And if Kathy's not like a King or other promoters. If she tells you something's going to happen, it's going to happen, Mick. Am I right?
So does that mean Hay against Klitschko, we can now say definitively 19 minutes past 9 on a Thursday night is dead?
Well, what we didn't get was which of the Klitschkos. It is looking increasingly likely that it's Vladimir. That was what the initial negotiations were about. It still leaves one of the brothers. Vitaly Klitschko fights the Cuban Adlanier Solis on March the 19th in his next defence of the WBC title. That's a mandatory defence. It's a fight that he has to take. That makes no difference to David Hay. It was reported earlier this week that him signing for that fight is another impediment, another dent in Hay's chances of getting to the big one. It's not, because that's a mandatory defence that Vitaly Klitschko had to take. But what this potential fight between Adamek and one of the Klitschkos does is just close the door on one of the options in a time span that's shrinking day by day for Hay if he is to retire.
Is he actually going to retire though? I mean, in the end, is he setting himself a deadline which he doesn't need to do?
Well, in all fairness, he's already made more money than he could have possibly ever dreamed he was going to make. And I know he'll make absolute fortunes for a Klitschko fight if it ever took place. I know, 10, 50 million. But he has his eyes on becoming the next Schwarzenegger, on becoming the next Bruce Willis. And he's not joking, and he's not going to, it's not like it was 20 years ago. He's not going to go out to Los Angeles and go and have a couple of meetings with people. He is being wined and dined, and he's been wined and dined for over a year in Vegas and Los Angeles by very influential and powerful people. He won't be a background character like Vinnie Jones was, who didn't even speak in that one particular movie. Trust me, they may take a punt on him and launch him like Chris Rock, the famous, I think it's Chris Rock, or The Rock, the famous wrestlers. Trust me, it could happen. So I tell you what, Ellie, I've got to be honest with you, I think he might very well retire. I think he might walk away.
And I think he was talking last week. We've played a snippet of that interview on 5 Live last week when the fight was called off, and he said that he can walk away from boxing if he doesn't meet either of the Klitschkos with his head held high. I'm not so sure that the legacy is really as important to him as people outside would want it to be. He's also said, look, I know I'm not going to go down as one of the great heavyweight champions, but professional boxing is about risk against reward. He's been heavily criticised, maybe rightly in some cases, for taking on the fight against Audley Harrison. He's earned more money than many British fighters in history have earned throughout their careers for that single one night. We spend enough time on this show. We made a special documentary about it in 2009, was it, about how so many boxers fall on hard times. You know, in one sense, we should be celebrating the business sense of what this man has done. And I'm not just
knowing the right time to walk away is a skill and stuff. Let's just move on.